You ever look back at a decision and think, that seemed harmless at the time, so how the hell did it end up changing everything? Tonight I'm going to tell you 3 true stories. Each begins with a seemingly innocent choice. A dinner, a slogan, a bottle of gin. But by the end, those choices will spiral into something much darker, and in some cases something legendary. Let's start in Draper, Utah. It's January 17th, 1977. A man named Gary Gilmore is walking toward an old abandoned canned food factory. It's silent. Snow is falling, cold air hanging in his lungs. He's surrounded by guards. He doesn't fight. He doesn't run. In fact, Gary is calm, almost eager. Inside the factory is just one big echoing space. No machines, no people. Just a single wooden chair facing a curtain across the room. That's it. Gary walks directly to the chair like he already knows the routine. He sits. Guards begin strapping his wrists and ankles down. Still, he doesn't resist. He stares dead ahead at that curtain. Now behind that curtain there are 5 small holes, each spaced evenly. You can't see through them, but Gary knows what's waiting behind them. 5 rifles, 5 men, a firing squad. Gary had requested it himself. See, Gary had been convicted of murder. The jury sentenced him to death. But in a strange twist, his own mother and even the ACLU fought to try and reduce that sentence, give him life in prison instead. You'd think he'd be relieved. Grateful even. But no, Gary refused it. He didn't want to rot behind bars. He wanted an end. And he wanted it by firing squad. He was the first person to be executed in the U.S. after the death penalty was reinstated, and he wanted to make sure it was on his terms. So that day, strapped to a chair in the middle of an abandoned building, he waited. The chaplain came forward, asked if Gary had any final words. Gary just stared ahead and said, "Let's do it." And with that, the rifles raised. The silence shattered, and Gary Gilmore was gone. Now, that should have been the end of the story. But here's where it gets strange. Fast forward 10 years, 1987, Portland, Oregon. A man named Dan Wyden, a marketing executive, is sitting in a meeting room surrounded by whiteboards, coffee cups, tired creatives. He's trying to crack a campaign for a new client, a small athletic company with some cool shoes. But they weren't selling. Not yet. The client, Nike. Dan knows they've got potential, but something's missing, something big. He needs a tagline that says something that feels like something. But everything they pitch sounds generic. And then in the middle of the meeting, out of nowhere, Dan thinks about Gary Gilmore. Yeah, the murderer, not the crime, not the trial, just those last words. Let's do it. It hits him like lightning. Dan tweaks the phrase slightly. Just a single word. Just do it. It was punchy, daring, defiant. It captured something raw, something real, and Nike loved it. That tiny phrase, born from the last breath of a condemned man, would go on to transform a struggling shoe company into a global empire. Nike didn't just sell sneakers anymore, they sold an attitude. And nobody ever knew the slogan's origin, but Dan did. Now let's take a sharp turn to London. Year 2009. Chris is 23, nervous, broke, and on a first date. They walk into a noisy, grimy McDonald's, not exactly candlelit, but it's all he can afford. Tomorrow he's got a huge job interview, one that could change his life. Tonight, fries and conversation. They order food, look for a table. The place is packed. But eventually they spot a seat. There's a lone guy sitting at a four-top, two empty chairs across from him. Chris leans over. Mind if we sit here? The guy shrugs. Go ahead. So they sit, eat, try to talk. But Chris can't stop thinking about the interview. He's nervous, barely touches his burger. Then he notices something's off. The man across from them is just staring, not at Chris, at his date. Eyes locked on her, expression unreadable. At first, Chris tries to ignore it. Maybe he's just zoned out. But then the man begins muttering, then whispering, then full-on insulting her. Chris is stunned. He asks, "What did you just say?" The man turns calmly and says to his date, "You're a pig." Something snaps. Chris, who's never been in a fight before, stands up. "Get up," he says, and the guy does. Except now Chris realizes this man is huge. He hadn't noticed before the guy was sitting the whole time. Too late. The man lunges, fists fly, chaos erupts in the middle of McDonald's, and Chris gets absolutely destroyed. The date ends with apologies, bruises, and silence. He stumbles home and crashes. The next morning he drags himself to the interview, black eye and all. The office is elegant, polished. The kind of place where everyone smells like wealth and filtered water. He walks in, gets strange looks from the receptionist, then the interviewers. But no one says anything about the bruises. Chris stammers through his lines, answers questions, tries to keep his confidence, but inside, he's sure he blew it. He leaves thinking there's no way they're hiring me. But days later, a phone call. He got the job. And not just any job. The interview wasn't for a desk position. It was a screen test, an audition, for a TV show, and the character a fighter. A brooding, rough-edged underdog. That black eye was perfect. The role, Jon Snow, Chris better known to the world as Kit Harington. So far, we've seen how a convicted killer's final words turned into one of the most iconic slogans of all time, and how a humiliating fast food fistfight accidentally launched an actor into stardom. But the last story, it's got an even stranger twist. This one starts nearly a century ago, 1925, at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire. Picture a dimly lit dorm room, jazz music barely humming from a scratchy old phonograph. A group of college seniors huddled around a desk, laughing, passing around a single dusty bottle of gin. It was illegal, of course. The United States was in the middle of prohibition. Alcohol completely banned. Didn't matter that these were grown adults. If you got caught, there were consequences. But for Ted, the 21-year-old student at the center of this tonight, was a celebration worth the risk. Ted wasn't just any senior. He was brilliant, funny, driven. He had just been named editor-in-chief of Dartmouth's humor magazine, The Jack-O-Lantern. It was the dream position for someone who wanted to be a writer. And Ted had big dreams. Big enough to gamble them over one illegal night. So they drank, laughed, shared stories. It was the kind of night that feels harmless until the knock. A sharp, firm rap on the door. Everything went quiet. Ted opened it, and there they were. 2 police officers. They'd been caught. Now they didn't get arrested, thankfully. And Dartmouth didn't expel them either. But they did drop the hammer in a different way. Ted was stripped of everything. His academic honors, gone. His magazine role gone. Even worse, the school told him he wasn't allowed to submit writing to the magazine anymore. Not under any name. It crushed him. The jack-o'-lantern wasn't just a hobby. It was the path, the thing that would launch him into the publishing world. Without it, he was just another kid with dreams and no voice. But Ted wasn't ready to give up. He had an idea, one that would change the rest of his life. If he couldn't publish as himself, what if he became someone else? So late one night, he pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, scribbled a new name at the top, and submitted a story to the jack-o'-lantern under that pseudonym. The editors, not realizing, and it was Ted, read the piece and loved it. They published it immediately. And just like that, Ted had found a way back in. Over the next several months, he kept submitting, always under the fake name. He watched from the shadows as his work kept getting printed, praised, shared across campus. All under the identity of a writer who didn't exist. And the funny thing, he liked it. There was something freeing about hiding behind the mask. No expectations, no baggage, just pure creativity. After he graduated, he kept the name. Years passed. Ted became a writer, a famous one. The name he'd created as a loophole became a brand, a global phenomenon. His books would be read by millions, entertaining, educating, and shaping entire generations of children. That fake name, Dr. Seuss. All of it, the rhymes, the illustrations, the cat in the hat, and the green eggs and ham. It all came from one night of forbidden gin in a college dorm. Now, let's pull back. You might be wondering, what do these stories have in common? On the surface, not much. An execution, a burger joint brawl, a college prank gone wrong. But underneath, they're all about choice, tiny decisions, almost invisible in the moment. But they spiral, they spread, like cracks in glass, until one day they define everything. Gary Gilmore wanted control over his end, but he unintentionally gave birth to a slogan that would move billions. Chris stood up to a stranger and walked into the biggest role of his life. Ted lost his voice and invented a new one that would echo through history. That's the thing about fate. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a big moment. Sometimes it's just a sentence, or a black eye, or a pen name. And sometimes it's the worst night of your life, the kind that ends in shame or regret or hopelessness that becomes the beginning of everything. The world is full of these moments. Some you'll see coming, some you won't. But they're real, they're waiting. Right now, someone out there is making a decision that feels small, but years from now, they'll look back and realize that was it. That's when the story changed. Now here's the strange part. For each of these people, the most life-altering moments didn't come with flashing lights or dramatic build-ups. There was no signpost saying, "Hey, this right here, this is your turning point." Gary Gilmore's final words were never meant to inspire anything. He wasn't trying to motivate anyone. Chris had no clue that a cheap dinner at McDonald's and a humiliating beatdown would somehow lead him to red carpets and Emmy nominations. Ted just wanted to sneak one more joke into a college magazine under a fake name. He didn't think he was inventing a cultural icon. But here's the twist that binds them all. They weren't trying to become anything. They were just reacting to pain, to limits to whatever life threw at them. Gary, in his own twisted way, took agency over his death, and in doing so gave Nike the raw, stripped-down defiance that would define their entire brand. Chris, embarrassed, battered, and broke, still showed up the next day. And it just so happened that showing up looking like a street-tough fighter was exactly what casting directors were looking for. Ted, punished and humiliated, created an identity out of necessity and accidentally gave birth to one of the most beloved voices in children's literature. And that's the most unsettling, inspiring part of all this. You don't always get to choose your moment, but you do choose what you do with it, because in a weird way, these weren't just stories about people. They were stories about thresholds, invisible lines that, once crossed, never let you go back. Gary's line was death, but even in that he left a sentence so sharp and defiant it pierced corporate history. Chris's line was humiliation, blood on a McDonald's floor. But he stood up, walked into an audition without even knowing it. Ted's line was shame, rejection. But he re-entered the very system that tossed him out and beat it at its own game. So what does that say about the rest of us? How many moments do we dismiss every day as just routine? The awkward conversation, the failed date, the door that slams shut in your face. What if those are the moments, the seeds, the whispers, the places where fate leans in and says, "What are you going to do with this?" That's why stories like these matter. Not because they're neat, not because they're tied up in a bow, but because they're messy, human, awkward, real, just like us. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes them powerful. Because here's the truth. You never know what you're building in the middle of your breakdown. You never know what story you're walking into until it's already begun. And you never know which part of your life will end up changing millions of others. It could be your worst day. It could be a mistake you regret. It could be a sentence you whisper, thinking no one is listening, only to have the world echo it back to you decades later. So next time you find yourself at the edge, staring at the thing you never asked for, remember Gary, remember Chris, remember Ted. And remember, even if it starts in the dark, even if it feels like failure, even if it's just one small choice, it might be the thing that changes everything.